This is definitely not how it looked in the tutorial. I have a big stack of maple and birch. When you examine the geometry of each piece, they look more like bananas than boards. Luckily, there is a use for them. Chopped into small blocks, they could form a nice end-grain cutting board, a project I was thinking about for some time now. Without a joiner though, I had only one real chance to make the blocks flat without risking my fingers on the table saw. The glorious hand plane. Yes, this isn't bait. After risking my fingers with the wonky table saw jig, I just went in and casually planed the two widest sides of each block by hand. 54 blocks times 2. And the funniest fact about it, it took me 2 days to build the jig and cut like 12 blocks. And the hand planing took 3 hours start to end, including fixing saw marks from the blocks that I previously cut on the table saw. Yes, I made some mistakes that you'll see after the glue up, but I gained enough confidence to do it again, no questions asked. I learned so much that I'd probably build another board soon, but let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. I decided to go for the simplest design now. 3 strips parallel to each other. I still have only 3 clamps, so the first thing I built was a clamping jig. It even helped me to clamp a park bench seat earlier due to its optimal size. The idea here is to have a flat reference surface. Blocks will sit on it during glue up to help me save some time later. If any mistakes happen, I can always plane the board. The router is one of the tools, along the sander, that I actually enjoy using. I also added a lip on the side to be able to clamp the strip on it, hopefully resulting in a side that is more or less even to help with flattening later. I did the first strip as a proof of concept a few weeks prior. I used it to test that small router sled I showed some time ago on the channel. It was designed with the cutting board in mind, taking into consideration the final dimensions I came up with. The process is simple. Get the strip glued up, then plane both sides, which will be either the edges of the board or the contact surface between the strips. I was too afraid to flatten the sides with hand plane and used router sled instead, but now I know it could do just as well. So, having the blocks ready and planed, I could proceed directly to the glue up. It's quite straightforward. I only need to remember that I need to put the blocks with the nicer side down. After the glue up, the board will be flipped and hopefully I'll end up with a flat surface. Or at least as close to it as possible. I try to spread the glue evenly, it's a balancing thing. If I put too much, I'll have a big squeeze out like on the first strip. Then the glue is annoying to work with as it gets tacky when sanding and clogs up the sanding disc. But if I use too little, I risk ending up with a visible gap and compromised structural integrity, and it's not acceptable in my first commercial project. Yes, I plan to sell the board as an actual start of my woodworking career. The glue ups are always time consuming, even if they don't require that much work. That's still okay with me. My mind likes to jump between projects, so doing stuff in parallel keeps me sane. One unfortunate thing is that if by any chance I can't complete a glue up in a day, I can't use the night to let the glue cure. I have to improve on that front, my planning should be a lot better. This board took 2 weeks to complete, and I feel it could be done in 2 days. I also need to invest some more time in the tooling work. Since I'm working with scrap wood without a jointer, the blocks don't have standardized sizes, so I can't glue up multiple strips on the same jig. That's the trade-off I'm willing to take for now. I'm not manufacturing the boards yet, and for hobby work the process can be slow. If my experimental pieces sell, I can always optimize it and build more jigs. After the glue is cured, I can proceed to plane the sides as with the prototype strip. I'm not that concerned about the strips being square. I will fix the geometry after the final glue up. I don't bother that much about the end grain surface yet. The board starts to resemble what I had in mind at this point, which is very satisfying. I gave the strips a rough sanding at that point, but then I decided that it would be better to leave them for now and do the glue up. Since the blocks were not perfectly square and sized, I will no doubt need to plane the board on the sled. This will remove the glue better than a sander, and I will need to do the sanding regardless. With that in mind, I could just glue the strips together. I thought I could do this with just the clamps, but they are too short, of course. Fortunately, the clamping jig can help me with that also. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Spread the glue, arrange the strips, clamp, and it should be a-okay. I imagined the final surface to be more even now, but the strips shifted a bit during clamping. Nothing that is project breaking yet. I will only need to take a bit more material from the top. It's a bit time consuming with my tiny router, but as I said, I enjoy the process enough not to bother that much. Even with the cheapest Chinese flattening bit that can reliably get only a few millimeters with each pass without tear out or blocking the machine. But hey, I managed to flatten a 56 by 42 inch workbench top doing 3 separate passes, so a 16 by 12 inch cutting board was a breeze. I also flattened the back. I know it won't be visible when the board is in use, but it will be lifted and flipped when washed, so I'd like it to be at least not ugly. After having 2 nice surfaces, or at least I assume they were nice, it was the time to square the board. People use table saws or truck saws for that, but I noticed that with this grain direction my table saw struggles a bit. But of course this is not a problem for the glorious hand plane. It took me about 10 minutes on each side. Getting the table saw out, setting up the fence and doing a cut would probably be quicker overall for all the sides, but I have no reliable way to avoid burn during cutting, especially with a 2-inch thick maple, and I don't really like the table saw that much. I did the longer sides even quicker. They were flat already. I just needed to square them up a bit. Due to how the blocks were arranged, planning those was quite easy, even with a somewhat dull blade I have on my hand plane. I need to schedule a sharpening session soon. Then it was time to do a rough 40 grit structural sanding. I can already see that there were gaps and voids in the surface. Some blocks were not planed straight enough and received too little glue. That's my bad. I am confident in the structural integrity, so the only worry now is the aesthetics. The board was nice overall, so being a homegrown, YouTube-trained expert on all things woodworking, I decided to fill the gaps with epoxy. I happen to have food-graded clear one with black tint that came with it. So I decided to stain it and fill in the small gaps in the surface. You can probably guess how horribly it went. If I had any more experience with the epoxy than rebuilding the housings for headlights of my old FSO 125p, the car that sometimes pokes out of the background, I would use clear resin to seal the end grain before using the black one. I should also use toothpicks, not that huge branch I used to mix it. Without sealing, I had to stand there, wait for the epoxy to sink in, and add some more. When I lost patience, I just left and redid the process after the first pour cured. It then sealed the wood, but I was not precise enough to feel everything. And I left ugly black stains all over the board that could not be sanded off easily. A total disaster. After thinking for a bit how could I salvage the situation, the board ended up in the router sled again. It doesn't need to follow any predetermined dimensions luckily. I took off about a millimeter of the top surface. This was a huge relief. Stains were gone and the biggest holes between blocks were filled with nice black epoxy. If I reverse the process next time and fill the gaps before first flattening, it should be good to go. But, of course, I didn't do the pour well enough. There were still places with small holes which drove me mad. I hate when this happens. All the experience acquired directly from YouTube that should make every step a breeze, and yet something always goes wrong. So, after calming my nerves a bit, I went with the next best things I could do off camera. Used sawdust and wood glue to cover the holes. Of course, I always have to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. I poured a lot of the glue on top of my repairs to hopefully fill everything in. And, as always, this bit me later. The glue cured, I sanded it off with a disc that was too coarse, of course, so there were spots I just ripped the repairs straight out. 3 afternoons of work and the board looks almost the same as when I started. In an act of desperation, not wanting to wait another day, I used CA glue and sawdust and proceeded to sand the board. If you're observant enough, you should be able to spot where my previous decision came back to haunt me. Yes, the big white spots hiding the wood grain. I just assumed it was birch, so it's naturally lighter. In reality, this was that wood glue I poured. So it went into the end grain and stayed there. I could have sanded it out more, but I didn't think it would be a problem. We'll get back to that in a minute. After being okay with the surface, I proceeded to add a roundover to the edges. I decided to go with a bigger one on top and just a little sanded off chamfer at the bottom. I was a bit afraid of how my tiny router would handle maple, especially from the end grain side, but it went quite okay. You might notice that orange electrical tape on the cable of the router. I had a small accident with a bit secured too loosely. It broke my project going in parallel, cut the cable and tried to end my woodworking career permanently. I enjoy the router, but if you have one, triple check the nut holding the bit. Next, I just sanded off all the burn and scratches from the router bit and gave the board a sanding with 120 grit. The next step was the most terrifying thing in woodworking for me so far. I spent 11 afternoons working on the board, and the possibility that I could trash the project by making a mistake with this step was quite stressful. I needed to cut out the recesses for handles, and since my router is tiny and already tried to assassinate me, more than once in fact, I decided to go with a chisel. The idea is quite simple. Since I have 3 strips, chiseling out the lower part of the edge block from the middle strip should do the trick. Then I just clean up the recess and be done with it. Why was I so stressed? Well, I clearly followed the fake it till you make it philosophy in my woodworking so far. And even if I technically could cut the edge if I botched the job, it would compromise the ideal proportions I had in mind, making the board personal use only instead of a commercial piece I was hoping for. And maple, especially, is brittle and can snap. With that in mind, I started the process, which, to my great satisfaction, turned out to be easy to control. I was enjoying every strike with my handmade mallet, which made the whole process even more fun. Yes, the cutout is not perfect, and yes, there could be a radius instead of a straight face in the corners, but even with that, I was so extremely happy with how it turned out that I stood 4 inches taller on the spot. I was even able to convince myself that leaving some marks from the chisel during sanding was not laziness, but proof that the board was actually handmade start to finish. The last things left were just the scuff sanding inside the cutout that I've done by hand and refining the corners a bit with a Dremel. I also broke the edge with sandpaper to make it smooth to the touch and was very happy to move to the most visually pleasing part, the mineral oil pour. Starting that cutting board project, I imagined exactly this moment. Well-framed shot of a spatula spreading the oil evenly around the surface, revealing the final color of the board along with the grain patterns. And that was exactly the moment my glue fill decision came back to bite me. As I poured the oil, both the color and grain patterns popped, sure, but the white stains from the glue did also. It was a huge disappointment, so much work and my payoff shot was crap. But there's no point skulking about it. One good thing is that we're not whiny crybabies here. If there is a problem, take a step back. Just like Viz always says, if you hit a wall, hit it hard. So hard you break it. I let the oil do its magic for the night though. Acting on the problem is one thing, acting on it on impulse is another. And as always, sleeping on it gave me the clarity on where to punch the wall to get to the other side. I decided that sanding off the glue would be the best way to approach the problem. Not wanting to ruin the surface, I grabbed 400 grit and started to work on it. Then I wiped the spot with a rag soaked in oil. It did something, but I didn't hit the wall hard enough. Before resorting to the ultimate, I grabbed a heat gun and tested if the oil thinned down by temperature would penetrate better. Yes, but still not perfect. So I switched to an aggressive offensive and grabbed a 60 grit sanding disc. More luck than brains, I suppose, because the glue got tacky and soft under the heat gun. And as I sanded it while still hot, it just peeled off. Complete success. There was just one small spot with the glue left, where it covered small holes of unknown origin. I prefer small, round, light spots over the visible holes. And with that, the project was rescued. Of course, I also oiled up the back and sides of the board, remembered to use the rag in the handle recesses, and was left with only 3 small things left to do. The first step was to oil up the board just enough. I used roughly a liter of mineral oil. I flooded the surface, spread the oil, and let it sit overnight. Yeah, I know I could just get back after a few minutes and reapply, but unfortunately, in the middle of summer I have stuff that could fill in the schedules of 3 clones and then some. After being satisfied with the result, I proceeded to the next step. It was adding silicone legs. I didn't pay close enough attention to the size, so they are a bit small, but I can always say it was a deliberate, minimalistic design choice. It's not a bug, it's a feature, as software developers like to say. After the legs were done, there's just one more step left in the process itself. Since my neighbor has kept bees for the last 60 years, I have easy access to ecological beeswax. So I proceeded to make some board butter. 1 part wax, 4 mineral oil, a jar, and poof, done. At least that's what the theory says. I bought an electronic scale with that in mind, but it broke, so I had to eyeball it. At the end, the effect was nice, so now just application, buffing, and my first project with commercial potential is done. What do you think? Would this be something you could use? If so, tell me how much would be appropriate to charge for something like this in the comments below. Appraising your own work is probably the most difficult thing for me, so all hints are welcome. I don't have anything set up for the selling process yet. I might start an Etsy in the near future. I could list it in Poland, but I don't know if it will sell. End grain cutting boards are quite niche. Or maybe I just let it sit in the workshop for a while before I have enough merchandise for a farmer's market or crafts fair. Or maybe I'll just give it to someone I like.